basically most people believe he's the best president that Brazil has ever had.
Good afternoon on my side, viewers from dewereldmorgen.be. That's the world tomorrow in English words. We are an alternative news site in Belgium and the Netherlands, publishing in the Dutch language about the social struggle here and abroad, about the climate activity, and of course about peace and whatever is going on in the world, because the world does not end at our borders. And today now on the 19th of November, we're talking to Brian Meer in Sao Paulo, if I'm not mistaken, in Brazil, on the other side of the globe and on the Western Hemisphere, to talk about Lula. Now, the occasion is the publication of this book, a biography of Lula by Fernando Moraes. And Brian, you are the translator of this book. And I can tell you it was really, really an exciting read to get to know the man better. What can you tell us about the book?
Well, it's part one of a two-part documentary series documentary biography series by Fernando Moraes, who's Brazil's greatest biographer, living biographer, and considered one of the best authors in Brazil, best-selling author and things like that. His books have sold over 16 million copies in 32 countries. One of the things he's known for mostly, two books he's really known for outside of Brazil are his biography of Paulo Coelho, right? I mean, that sold a lot. And also, he wrote a very good book that was published on Verso in English about the Cuban spies who were arrested in the 1990s, infiltrating far-right Cuban groups in Miami. Moraes is an interesting historical figure in Brazil himself. During the dictatorship, he was a journalist. He's currently president of International Press Service, which is based out of Rome. He's a longtime journalist, but during the 70s, he was part of the official opposition political party to the dictatorship called the MDB. At the time, the dictatorship created a kind of US-style system in which they had two official parties. One was the government party, which was called Arena, the hardline, right-wing military party, and then the MDB was also
what does it stand for, MDB?
Brazilian Democratic Movement.
Okay.
So it was mostly 70% of the party was center-right, or even farther than center-right, but it was a kind of an umbrella party that did offer space to communists who didn't want to go into official opposition to the regime, didn't want to engage in armed struggle, thought they would be able to work within the system. And he comes from that internal tendency of the MDB. He actually was elected state congressman for MDB during the 1980s after the country opened up fully for democracy. And he became the Minister of Culture for the state of Sao Paulo. So he's known Lula since the 1970s, although he's never been a member of the Workers' Party. So when Lula was looking for a biographer, he thought this would be a good guy because he knows my whole story. At the same time, he can't be accused of just being entirely favorable to me because he's never been a member of our party. Even despite that, some of the blurbs on the back book cover make it look like he's a total Workers' Party insider. Now, during creation of the book, he spent about 10 years working on it and hundreds of hours of interviews with Lula and lots of other people, including former military dictatorship officials and former, nominated or elected officials from the dictatorship era, journalists, friends of Lula. It's very, very comprehensive. And he even includes some episodes in which he was present in conversations with Fernando Henrique Cardoso and Lula in the 1970s. And the book has a non-linear timeline. It opens, the first 70 pages, basically, are about the 3 days before Lula was arrested in 2018 on arbitrary charges in a U.S. Department of Justice led anti-corruption investigation. They had no material evidence against him. It was an election year, and a lot of people feel that journalists and even people who don't like Lula, like Glenn Greenwald, believe that he was arrested simply to remove him from the elections and open the door for Jair Bolsonaro to take the presidency. And this is pretty much confirmed by the fact that the judge who rejected over 100 defense witnesses for Lula and also made his ruling based on circumstantial evidence. No material evidence whatsoever was presented. Immediately after Bolsonaro was elected, was nominated justice minister for Brazil. Um, so anyway, the first 3 days talks about the first part of the book talks about the lead up to his arrest, and Moraes, as his biographer, happened to be with Lula at that time, so he was there when around 15,000 members of labor unions and social movements surrounded the building that Lula was holed up in, the ABC Steelworkers Union headquarters in São Bernardo, an industrial satellite city of São Paulo. That's the union that Lula led, historic strikes with in the 1970s that helped trigger the fall of the dictatorship. And he was privy to all of these conversations behind the scenes. A lot of party insiders and social movement people and things were arguing with Lula that he should not turn himself in. And Lula made the decision basically that there were a couple of reasons he made this decision, but one of them was that he felt that it was more important to respect the democratic rule of law and prove his innocence. He was arrested. They had to make an exception to the Constitution in the Supreme Court to enable him to be arrested before his appeals process played out. And he said, well, once I get in, I'll win my appeal because there's no evidence against me anyway. And he thought he was probably go in for a few days and get out on a habeas corpus, but he spent 582 days behind bars. So the next section of the book covers that period, the next chapter, in which a rotating group of about 1,000 people camped out in front of the federal police headquarters where he's held prisoner, just so they could yell good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to him every day. I was there at that time covering it for Telesur, and he was visited by a lot of interesting people, heads of state, current and former heads of state, and celebrities, Noam Chomsky, Danny Glover. And then it flashes back to the moment before he was arrested in 1980 during the dictatorship for leading these wildcat strikes. There's a chapter on that, and then it flashes back to his whole early life, going forwards in time from his early childhood in a mud shack in the semi-arid backcountry of Pernambuco with no running water, to his mom taking his 8 brothers and sisters and him on a truck for 15 days down to Santos to find their dad, who had shacked up with another woman. And so he grew up in crushing poverty, ended up going into the labor union movement and discovering that he was actually a very good labor negotiator and organizer. So it covers the strikes and the labor activity in the 70s and the resistance to the dictatorship, the episode where his brother was brutally tortured for 15 days with electric shock. His brother, communist, talks about why Lula never joined the communists, why he didn't like the communists so much, always arguing with his brother. And basically, the book ends with Lula losing. Well, these are all historical episodes. It's not a spoiler or anything, really. I mean, it just ends with him losing in time, with him losing his first election campaign for governor of São Paulo, being really disappointed, deciding he's going to quit politics, and then Fidel Castro meeting him and telling him, you have to keep going in politics. This is the first political party in the world that was ever completely founded by the working class, by the labor unions. And he decides to run for Congress and wins with the highest amount of votes in Brazil. And it ends at that point. The second book, Moraes is working on right now, volume 2, and that's going to cover his presidencies, the lead up to his presidencies and his presidencies.
So
So,
so he managed to do two mandates finally. I mean, if you read the book, you will see that actually he didn't even believe that he was going to successful. He was not even a good speaker in the beginning, so he evolved into the man that we know today. He had two mandates, and then you already told what happened, and now he's in his third mandate. And Brian, what I would like to know from you on the domestic level, how is he doing for the moment?
well, his popularity level is higher than Bolsonaro's was 2 years into his presidency. The latest polls have him have 63% of the population saying that they think he's doing a good to excellent job, or at least doing a fair and okay job, whereas 32% think he's doing terribly. And those are the Bolsonaro, mostly the Bolsonaro supporters. Surprisingly, the poll also shows something like 15% of the electorate doesn't see any real difference between his presidency and Bolsonaro's presidency, which just shows there's a lot of politically disengaged people in Brazil as well. However, he's having some problems, uh, especially because this is the farthest right Congress that Brazil has ever had since the return to democracy. Basically, Brazil has been run by the same 200 families uh, for 150 years, and probably three-quarters of those families, you could say, they've been running the country since the 1600s, which are the agribusiness elites, and their political machines, their local political machines. Add to those agribusiness elites people connected to the industrialists who rose up in Sao Paulo in the 1870s, 1880s with the coffee boom and all of that as well. And these people and their cronies and the members of their political machines switch parties at the drop of a hat, whatever suits their electoral purposes, and they always side with whoever's in power, switching sides. So basically, uh, the Workers' Party and its inner circle allies, which are the Communist Party of Brazil, the Socialist Party of Brazil, and the Green Party of Brazil, only have 82 members of Brazil's 513-member Congress. A big majority are these people from the center right connected to these old traditional families. And you can say basically the same ratio in Senate. And also you have this far right party, the Liberal Party, which isn't part of the governing coalition. These other parties all switched sides. They all supported Bolsonaro vehemently during his government. And then shortly before Lula took power, he brokered the deal with all of these other big center-right parties to switch sides. And that entailed having to turn over a bunch of cabinet ministries to them. And also it's making it very hard to undo all of the economic damage that was incurred after the 2016 coup by Dilma Rousseff, against Dilma Rousseff,
Against,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the things that they did was Michel Temer pushed through a constitutional amendment freezing above inflation spending increases on public health and education for 20 years. And this in a country with a population that's still growing, right? And it done after he'd already made cuts. So the deal that Lula and his finance minister, Fernando Haddad, made, they couldn't fully undo it, but they pushed through an amendment before Lula even took office, overriding that amendment, but stipulating that spending could increase 2.5% over inflation in health and education if the budget was balanced, in accordance with GDP growth that year. So, for example, if GDP only grew 1%, they could only increase the level by 1%. But the top level was 2.5%. This is proving to be really unpopular It's a kind of economic straitjacket on the Lula administration. And even though the GDP is estimated to grow 2.9% this year, it's outperformed IMF expectations 2 years in a row significantly. The original projection for IMF this year was 0.5%. Um, with this 2.5% cap, it's hard to really use the growing economy for redistributive policies. And it's frustrating Lula. There's a big battle going on right now where the budget's not balanced. And so the media, the conservative mainstream media, and the the people on Faria Lima Avenue, which is like Brazil's Wall Street, are pressuring Lula to cut social spending. And he's fighting back and saying, we have to cut subsidies to big business and we have to install a tax on the super rich. So that's one issue. There have been a lot of positive things he's done. For example, some of the biggest and most traditional universities in Brazil, public universities, were on the verge of having to be shut down when Bolsonaro was president because he wasn't giving them enough money to pay their teachers and their staff. So Lula immediately undid that. He rescued all the universities. They've pushed through some innovative policies like they're converting 500 vacant government buildings across the country to public housing, ownership-based social housing, and schools under management of the social movements, which is a cool thing. And there's a lot of examples of cool things, little things that he's pushed through. But there's a big worry in the Workers' Party that if they can't override this economic straitjacket,
Yeah.
they're going to have problems getting reelected in
Yeah.
2026.
But nevertheless, what I hear from you, your analysis of now, it is quite similar with his political situation when he was president for 2 times in a row, also with a minority PT. And he managed quite well in those days. So my expectation is hopeful. He's a negotiator. He can find consensus and compromise. Anyway, I want to switch to another level of his presidency on the international scene. For the moment, the G20 is going on in Brazil. And here the mainstream press is portraying him now as if he has now come to his senses and is now again turning to the West as if that is the only commonsensical thing to do. That is what they write and say here, is if they say something positive about him. But I guess you have another view on that.
Well, the you have to look at the last 50 years of Brazil's foreign relations. Brazil always tries to maintain a neutral position, regardless of who's in the presidency. I mean, even with Bolsonaro in the presidency, he couldn't push through the kinds of foreign policy things he wanted. And Lula is on board with that strategy. He's has a lot of sympathy with the old non-aligned movement of the 60s and 70s. And
Yeah.
so he's taken a non-aligned position on the Ukraine conflict, which has annoyed some people who are really pro-Russia, and also it's annoyed everyone in the United States government. And he's holding firm with that. Also, he's refused to put Brazil on the new Silk Road initiative of China, but bilateral relations with China are very good. China's Brazil's most important trade partner, and China just awarded Dilma Rousseff the Friendship Medal, which is the highest honor in China. It was this huge ceremony. They're very happy with the way Rousseff is managing the new development bank. There was some criticism about joining the New Silk Road. At one point within the Workers' Party, they were worried about what would happen to the reindustrialization plan program that's in place. They're opening up new factories. They're trying to reindustrialize, and they're worried that they have to be very careful about how they negotiate entering the Silk Road because of its possible effect on factory jobs in Brazil. But I think it's kind of an excuse. I think Lula's just playing the middle ground and he's jockeying for I mean, basically, there's a big risk that the Trump administration is going to try and coup him,
Yeah,
especially with Elon Musk involved. And so he's kind of like the worst gaffe that his government has made, I think, is regards to Venezuela, right? I mean, that was, and there was a big break between Lula and his own party on this. The Workers' Party immediately officially recognized the results of the election in Venezuela, even before the Supreme Court ruling. But with Celso Amorim leading, the way in things, Brazil's posture regarding the government's official posture has been really bad. It hasn't gotten on board, 100% with the United States. It refused to recognize Edmundo Gonzalez as elected leader. They're complaining about both Gonzalez and Maduro. Uh, Celso Amorim positioned himself as this kind of like mediator in the electoral process, but nobody invited him to do it. So he's saying things like, well, we were witnesses at the Barbados Accords. So that gives us a position to, mediate this conflict between the two parties in the election. And the Venezuelan government saying, no, it doesn't give you that power. Nobody's invited you to do that. And, we don't want you. And so I think it's really bad news in terms of the last 40 years of the Workers' Party, fighting for sovereignty in Latin America, in South America. It's like it's hypocritical, At the same time, it doesn't represent fully getting on board with the United States or NATO's plans for Venezuela. And furthermore, some people are speculating this was done preemptively to prepare for the Trump presidency so that it couldn't, support for Venezuela couldn't be used as an excuse to coup
yeah,
Brazil. Nevertheless, it's hypocritical, in my opinion, but I lived in Brazil the whole first 8 years of Lula presidency. He always does things that annoy. He can find ways to anger everybody on the left, the right, and everything. It's just, it. I don't think that this position on Venezuela means that he's, for example, a NATO pawn or a U.S. pawn, or because you have to look at the entire context, and it's just something that's unfortunate. And I hope that they can smooth this out,
yeah.
the relations between Brazil and Venezuela soon.
But I think that uh, a good leftist point of view, one should always be critical of governments, of presidents, whomever they are. But at the same time, I think we can say that for the Brazilian people at large, the ordinary Brazilian workers and the poor and the peasants and so on, that he is the best thing that ever could have happened to them in the last decades. Can you agree
Yeah,
with that?
yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I think the only other two presidents that you could compare him with in terms of redistribution of wealth and reduction of poverty and hunger are Getulio Vargas during the 1930s and 40s, who created Brazil's first minimum wage, founded its national petroleum company, its national mining company, nationalized a lot of industry, but at the same time had kind of fascist tendencies and, deported the wife of the head of the Brazilian Communist Party to Auschwitz and also banned women from playing football. And then you have Dilma Rousseff, which you have to look at kind of like a continuation of the Lula administration. But basically, most people believe he's the best president that Brazil has ever had in Brazil. If you took a poll,
Yeah.
he always comes out first.
Brian, once again, thank you for this clear analysis. So to give a counter view of what is being portrayed here in our mainstream media, let me remind you, it's still in English, Verso books, translated by Brian Lula, a biography. There's going to be a second one, and hopefully some Dutch publisher will make a Dutch translation. Brian, thank you very much.
Thank you.